Thanks, Brian. Yeah. So I am in Charleston, South Carolina, and DC a lot, and love being in the community. The first thing that we have to say is thank you to WeWork. They gave us this space and helped us organize the event, and have been a good partner. So what a terrific space, and I'm glad to be here. And as far as our startup grind plan is to host a startup grind every month, but we'll do a party in the summer and then a party in the holidays. So we'll probably be doing like 10 fireside chats in the next year and a couple of get-together opportunities. So please share it with your friends, and let's build everyone back up in person. I was telling Mike earlier that we as a group used to, pre-COVID, have 100, 150 people to an event, and I think it's just everybody's slowly figuring out what that looks like again. So, of course, we have people tonight online, which is fantastic. Thanks for joining us, and then people here in the room. So together, I think we'll have a fun process of hybrid. So with that, I will switch us over to hearing from Mike, which I am ecstatic to hear more of your story and also share it with this group. It's so incredibly impressive. There are different types of entrepreneurs in my mind. There's the hustler entrepreneur that had a lemonade stand and a newspaper stand and sold cell phones, and they just sell everything under the sun, and they become an entrepreneur. And then there's other entrepreneurs that fall into it sideways because they were working in that type of business and they see an opportunity and they take it, but they're that mindset. And then I think there's the engineer entrepreneur that really just understands something at a technical level and sees an opportunity. Just like there's an introvert and an extrovert style. So for everyone's edification, when did you first think, I want to start a business? What age were you when that happened to kind of define the type of entrepreneur that you are?
Well, I'm definitely a late blossoming entrepreneur, that's for sure. But it was probably in my early 30s. So I had gone to graduate school and with the idea, so prior to going to school, I worked for a Fortune 500, large corporation, and the dream I had back then was being a division manager, leading maybe international or something along those lines. And as I got back out into the working world after that, the idea dawned on me. But I would say I'm also not an extreme risk taker, maybe a risk manager.
Yeah.
And so it took me a while to take the full plunge.
Well, one of the things I like to say about entrepreneurs is that we're mitigated risk takers. People say, "Oh, you take all this crazy risk," and the reality is we really don't. We end up finding these little loopholes, right? Bill Gates, for instance, everyone's, "Oh, he dropped out of Harvard and started Microsoft." That's not true at all. He took a leave of absence, and he was totally willing to go back if this thing didn't work out, right? That's mitigated risk. I hear that in your voice. So talk to that a little bit, like what you were really, what kind of timeline were you giving this idea? Where were you at in the mitigation process?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of folks, it started out nights and weekends, and also too, I guess there are a number of startup stories that they really there's a story that happens first, right? And often it's maybe another failed startup that led you to this, right? I think Twitter's a great story. I think Slack's a great story. This was where you might characterize that as a pivot. I think I mentioned in the chat earlier. pivot would be too kind. But I started working on another concept, and
what was that concept?
Well,
just for everyone's
yeah, it's a bit of an oxymoron, but I would characterize it as practical social media. So this is back in 2010, 2011, and what I found was that when I would talk to folks about it and tell them a little bit about what I was doing, I seem to have gotten more interest in how I find the small service provider that I was working with in India than necessarily the concept itself. And so that sort of started to lay the seed, in addition to some other things of, hey, maybe there's an opportunity here to build a platform for small and mid-sized professional services.
And that really does kind of send you off in this direction. So real quickly, since we're at that point, just do the elevator pitch for a clutch. Like, tell us what it is today, not back then. Just set the stage for what clutch is.
Yeah, so the quick summary is a platform for small and mid-sized professional services firms. So ratings and reviews, and where we are now. I think if a lot of you are probably familiar with Gartner, Forrester, or these large, sophisticated enterprise research firms. You're also probably familiar with some of the freelancer platforms like Upwork and Fiverr, and you sort of sit in the middle between those two sets of service providers and focus on small and mid-sized firms. From well, I mean, we do have some folks that are individuals, but the smallest, 3 to 5 people in maybe a design agency, all the way through a few hundred, in some cases over 1,000 employees.
So take us back then, and what were you thinking it was going to be when you first launched it? What were you trying to solve in that moment?
Yeah, so I think, like a lot of folks, I was more focused on starting something that provided, professional freedom, and I'd spent a lot of time previous to that in management consulting. I had written business plans. God knows how many financial models that I developed that were, hockey sticks up and to the right, and all that type of stuff. And early on, I did none of that. It was very, very practical of how do I get a website up and running? How do I get some initial traction?
Was the initial traction getting businesses that wanted reviews? Like what would I have done back then? What year was this?
This was so our founding story, which is always a simplification of reality, is that we launched in 2013, but there was a fair bit of work prior to that, but in 2011, 2012. And so since we're a rating and review side, but it's essentially a two-sided platform, right? You've got buyers of services and sellers of services. And it really goes for any such platform. You've got to have a balance, right? You've got to have enough service providers for the buyers, enough buyers for the service providers. And it's a bit of I think of development, it's almost like a corkscrew. You add service providers, and then you add more buyers, and you add more service providers as you gradually build the platform. So, but early on, it was challenging to get service providers to let us collect reviews with their clients, because no one had really done that in this space. And I know it's probably mind-boggling, right? Now, even back in 2012, right? Online ratings and reviews have been around for 15 years almost, right? But for professional services firms, very few, if any, had collected reviews. Maybe a few had collected some on Yelp or on Google, but it really was unusual. And convincing them to trust us was a challenge, and we really needed that content to provide any value to buyers. Right? Obviously, if you're going to a site to read about and get validation on whether it's a product or a service, whether it's B2C or B2B, you need that, unique content that helps to build trust.
Tell us some of those. Obviously, you're describing the challenge of getting people to show up to a party, right? And what were the ways you solved that early on? How did you go get new people on the platform? What were your guerrilla tactics?
The guerrilla tactics was picking up the phones, right? I mean, it's
brute force attack. We call that one.
Absolutely brute force, and it's I look at starting a platform or starting a segment within a platform. It's like, I'm sure we studied a little bit of physics, right? Friction, right? There's static friction is really, really hard to break. Once you break it, it's not like you don't have to work, but things get easier. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. I think this goes for any two-sided platform. You get a couple of reviews, and it's for let's say it's a mobile app development services firm, and then the next one you call on, you've at least got one data point to be like, hey, you may or may not be folks, but they've trusted us. Here's the type of content that would help them develop, and the type of traffic that we're generating for them. And so once you get a few, it gets a little bit easier each time to convince people to get to join the platform.
Were you making those phone calls?
I was making some of them, and then we bootstrapped the company, so we didn't go out and raise. These days it seems to be they raise millions on just an idea, but and so we were very focused on using contractors here and there to help us get started. So I did some of that, and then we got some contract help to call on these service providers to help us build up the content.
And so at that time, 2013, when you're launching, who physically was in the room? How many people?
There was three of us. There was me and a couple of new hires. It was that's all we could afford at that point.
Yeah, but based here in DC the whole time.
Based here in DC.
Yeah, and so where was the first office with the three of you?
Yeah, so the first office, right, of course, was the dining room table. That was, I don't know if anyone is familiar with Mount Pleasant, but we were up in Mount Pleasant, so around the dining room table, and then that was the beginning of 2013, and towards the end of that year, we made a leap to a co-work space, not WeWork. I know they're thank you to WeWork for having us here. It was a small local competitor that was more convenient locally, location-wise, and we made it was a tough decision. It was $1,500 a month to make a move into
so from the dining room table.
From the dining room table.
$1,500.
Yeah, for the 3-person co-work, it's closet almost, right? And that was, it sounds funny to say, but that was an agonizing decision. Should we spend $1,500 a month to collaborate? And I think it worked out.
Yeah, it worked out great.
Yeah.
But those early decisions, take us to that time. You're having to decide $1,500. What's the thought process? How did you? They are agonizing at that point. But what were the metrics you were using? Was it users? Was it revenue? What did you look at to go, okay, we should do this?
Yeah, it was really a combination of those two. So we relied on the buyer side. It was a fair bit of cold outreach, emails, phone calls to get service providers onto the platform. And then on the buyer side, it was largely SEO. So could we build good content? We get people to link back and endorse that content, get us up in the search results so we could get buyers. So buyer traffic was huge because it was content that led to buyer traffic that then led to revenue. And so at the end of 2013, I don't think we were break even, but certainly again, I was funding this out of my savings, and so certainly revenue was a just practically speaking was a really key metric.
Right.
And pretty quickly we got, well, maybe not that quickly, but once we got to what I characterize as quasi break even, because you do all sorts of stuff to bring your costs down. We added costs as we added revenue. So we worked in a very sort of traditional bootstrap manner.
So you're spending your own money to stay alive, but what were you plotting to know? We can. I know when we started GoTo Team, I had to have X number of shoot days in a month to break even, and had we had 3 months of not hitting that, we would have had to shut the company down, right? So what were your window of horizon that you were looking at? That's like, if we could get this revenue, then I've pushed out, another month. I've made it. I've extended the runway. What were you? How far out did you think you had?
Yeah, so it was actually probably that metric was, so we got the company within about a year and a half of what I'll call quasi break even, right? That's founders working for free, right, and doing everything else you can. So there was a point that revenue was going up, right, and we were adding costs, maybe not quite as quickly as revenue went up, and at some point, I had at that point in time, my wife and I had a mortgage. We had just had 2 kids. I couldn't work for nothing forever. That was for sure. So it was. I don't remember exactly when I started to take a small paycheck, but that was just a basic necessary element, right?
Sure. Do you remember a moment that you were questioning if you were going to be able to make that the runway work?
I would say probably the most terrifying moment was maybe 2 months in, and so I was working full time with this. I brought on a couple of people to try and make stuff work. We had a kid in private daycare. My wife lost her job. That was a difficult point, and so one of the questions that I had in my mind was, do I then try and find some type of, I've done business consulting before, consulting contract to help provide some positive cash flow this whole situation, but it was that's challenging too. You can spend a lot of time, for those of you that have done consulting work, right? You can spend a lot of effort and not necessarily land a client. So it was to some extent, it felt like I think everyone's probably, if you remember back to your history, I've forgotten which of the Spanish conquistadors, but they got to South America and they burnt ships, right? Right. It was like there is no going back. We are going forward. There's no route back. I don't think I ever quite got to that point, but it felt a little bit like that. Like, hey, we could go back, but you know what? It's a long trek back to the beach and the ships. Right. Better go forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times the entrepreneurial experience is that you swim halfway across the lake and then you stop and swim back. Like, no, just keep going, as painful as it is. But so in your case, you did have that moment. You could have gone back, picked up some consulting and mitigated it. Yep. But at any point, did you think, oh, this exercise isn't making sense, should just do something different? Or were you like, no, this is good, we need to keep going, I just need more time?
I think it was mostly the latter, because we were seeing gradual, monthly progress. Our traffic was going up, our content was going up, our revenue was slowly, but it was heading north. And it, you know, the question more was how aggressively do you add cost? Do you hold that steady to build some breathing room, or do you get a little more aggressive and either run a business and break even or
We've talked a lot about money and revenue, break even, all the things entrepreneurs think of first. The other thing that is probably more important at that stage is the people, right? You've got these two other people in the room with you, and then slowly probably adding other people. Help everybody understand your skill set and what the other people in the room were bringing to the table, just to set the tone of who's in the room.
Yeah. So my skill set prior to this was I'd done some engineering straight out of school, then some management consulting and some IT consulting, not necessarily as a developer. And the other two folks were really a little bit of sales, but really jack of all trades. And we probably our first dozen hires were jack of all trades, right? And I don't know how you can start a company without a team that's flexible. And I think if you're venture funded and you're going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on VPs of this and VPs of that, then maybe that's the case. But you don't know what's coming next, and you don't know whether how aggressive should I build out a marketing department? If you hire people that just want to do marketing and just have marketing skills, well, if you decide to go slower or faster, and obviously worst if you decide to go slower, what do you do with those folks? So we very much focused on hiring folks with a liberal arts degree and a willingness to do whatever it took. And that was a little bit of sales work, it was a little bit of content work, it was a little bit of SEO work, and gradually over time started to build functions, often with generalists that have developed their skills in a particular area and shown interest.
So we've kind of gone all the way from early 2013 to you've gotten some traction, you've gotten some revenue, you're past some of those early depth points. Take us to the next level. At what point did you look around and go, oh, like we actually have a business, like I'm actually getting paid, and this might actually be something that sustains itself?
Do any folks in the room, are you in the WeWork space, working in the WeWork space? Okay. And so we were in a different co-work space, and I remember I think we had moved up to like a 6-person room. It was like, wow. And I remember at the opposite end of the hall was a corner office for 10 people, right above, if anyone knows, the Shake Shack on Connecticut Avenue. And I remember at that point in time, it's like, wow, if we get to a point where we can fill that room and we can afford it, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was $4,000 or something like that. And we've made it. We've made it. And sure enough, we ended up getting that corner space, a few smaller offices, not without, but I guess I certainly felt at one point, oh yeah, we've made it now, we've got this 10-person room, but there were certainly some ups and downs at that point.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because my favorite question is always, okay, you got there, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. And then what happened? Because there's always the follow-up. It's very rare that it's like, and then that's when we went public, right? We were set after that.
Yeah, no, it was. I think probably the biggest challenge that we ran into at that point was we
we launched the company with a brand name called Sourcing Wise. And not great. I'm an engineer. I came up with that. I could buy it for $11.95, so that tells you. And it was pretty clear probably that this was 2014, 2015. It was pretty clear shortly after we got started that the service providers hated it. And for those of you that are familiar with the term sourcing, it's about procurement people trying to grind down the price, and it has nothing to do with the value that the service providers or have a positive connotation to it. And we went through a long cycle of trying to figure out a new name. Everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but the vast majority is saying, how hard can that be? Right? I can name something that I think is probably most people that have gone through that process realize it is not simple. And we tried a crowdsourcing solution as sort of a single shingle consultant, and finally actually landed with a really great firm to help us with that. But and for those of you that are familiar with SEO, right, making a domain change when we were 100% reliant on SEO at that point in time. We still are pretty dependent on Google, and so probably the most terrifying moment, at least in those first few years, was we made it to that corner office in the co-work space, and I knew we had to rebrand. We studied tons of other examples, and all the examples said it's going to take a month. You're going to lose half your traffic. It's going to gradually come back, and a month in, you should be okay. And of course, everything that Google writes about it, they're like, our algorithms are good. We figure it out. And you can have that in your head and do that research, but then going through. So we made that decision. And sure enough, we lost half our traffic. And so, I don't remember exactly how many teammates we had then, but probably a dozen. And that traffic is the driver of your revenue. Week 2 ticks by. No progress. Oh, I know, we did all this research, right? But it's in your stomach and in your heart. It's terrifying. And so, but we were about a month in, 95% back. That was a truly agonizing period of time.
Absolutely. And so how long did it take before you felt like, we are going back up?
It was about a month.
Oh, so
yeah,
research.
Yeah. So the research was right on, and I don't know what I assume it would be faster today, but it was in particular the first 3 weeks of that was really difficult. It's like, okay, it's taken years to even get to this point, and then we're making a change, which thankfully I was pretty confident we had to make the change, but it was a pretty terrifying month.
How did you feel about the brand? Tell us how that went when they presented it to you. You come up with the name, maybe you need to change, but now creatives are doing their creative thing. And how did you feel? Were there multiple options?
We had multiple options. And has anyone gone through a naming process before? I mean, it's a tough process, right? Because you've got lots of constituents, right? Everyone thinks they know what it should be. You've got all the domain options, right? Do we need a .com? Do we append something to it, a get, or a HQ, or do we go with an alternative domain name? And all those challenges to it. But we ended up with a really great naming firm after striking out twice, or 2 strikes before that. Third time was a charm, and they presented some really terrific options, like like most things, we whittled it down to a top 3 and did some testing. I would say the name we settled on. Like always, you're going to get some mixed feedback, mostly positive, but not all. And then, we made a decision to go with a .co name, which I think was the right decision. But it still has some challenges. We get emails sent to .coms and this and that. So it's certainly not perfect, but I think it's the right choice for us.
Yeah, you come through that. So I'm definitely going to leave time for some questions, but I'm going to fast forward this because I think there's a really interesting part of this particular startup grind, which is, when did you get to a point that you said, well, maybe this company, Collections, is awesome and doing a really good thing in the world, but maybe it's time for Mike to do something else? When did that come into your head?
Well, I think it's always been in the back of my head, am I the right person to do this? But we once we got to 70-ish people here in, we're now about 80, and then we've got probably another 80 or so in Eastern Europe, the Philippines, and Mexico. Once you get to that point, you've completely transitioned from being involved with everything in great detail. Well, that probably stops happening at sort of a dozen, maybe 20 folks. But it's definitely you're working with managers, in some cases managers, right? And the next phase of growth is very much about building and managing an effective organization. And through most of my career, I've managed teams, but they've been relatively small teams, and there's also been a fair bit of individual contributor consulting work as well. And I came to the point that not that I couldn't do it, but for me, it was swimming upstream. And for me, I believe what I enjoy the most, I'm probably best at, is sort of 0 to 1 product market fit, and there are other folks that building and scaling an org is swimming downstream, and so why not get someone who's a better fit, skill and interest wise to do that, and and so that's where we came to the conclusion, or I came to the conclusion. I had to, at this point, we had brought on some investors, and so we obviously had to work through them, and then went through a pretty lengthy recruiting process to bring in a new leader.
And how long ago was that? 2 years, maybe?
Yeah, so finally came to a conclusion last summer, but it probably.
But you started it.
Yes.
A couple of years.
Yeah.
And so then last summer you become chairman. Now I almost said step down.
Well, that was sort of when we started the process. We brought on the new CEO right at the end of the year, and then we did it. So I sort of stepped down to day-to-day literally sort of a month or two ago.
Okay, I didn't realize it was that close.
Yeah.
So today you're chairman and still very much involved, still serve a lot of roles, but no day-to-day.
I am, I think, even within the last month, have been out of all the day-to-day.
And how did that feel? I'll say I left my company. I started 25 years ago. I left it in 2013. And the day I left, I sent an email telling everyone how much I'd appreciate everything and that I was still going to be around as majority shareholder. And I literally came into work the next day and thought, not the same place, but available.
Yep.
Not in that office, but available, thinking, oh, they'll need something.
Yeah.
Crickets that day. And I was like, oh, I guess either that's a good thing that I'm jail or bad. I'm not sure. Maybe they're happy to see me go. But what was your experience in leaving? Did you feel good about it? And man, I made the right choice.
I definitely made the right choice. but that doesn't mean that I haven't been, conflicted, right? And there, I think leading up to it, it was definitely sort of 80% of the time I'm like, yes, we need to, got to do this. And then I'd be a liar if I didn't say 10, 20% of other days. How can I not do this? And for that percentage, as sort of made the decision that we went through the recruiting process, that percentage continued to shed. And yeah, no, it's the last few weeks, yeah, crickets, which I think is a testament to the team and our new CEO. So
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, so I am going to stop us there because I think we've come to the heart of that story. But I really want to leave time for questions to hear from everyone else. I could ask questions all night long as I've been involved with Startup Grind and so many other fireside chats like this. It's just my favorite thing. I hope you guys are as energized by Mike as I am, and I just really appreciate you sharing the story and being with us. And I could go until 2 a.m. this morning just continuing to hear the stories. So we can start here in the audience. Brian's going to monitor our chat online. So if we have any questions coming in virtually, fire them up. And Brian will be your proxy. But for now, here in the room, do we have any questions? Anybody jump in?
Revenue is number one in HR and legal and economic. Well, how do you prioritize most important elements?
Let me for those online real quick, I'll just recap that to say we have a member of the audience who's working on startup, and of course startups, everything seems important. How do you prioritize?
well, I don't know if I've got a good answer for you because you're right, everything is, but it does inside this maybe is an obvious answer, but it's those things that are going to, if you're bootstrap, it's got to be about those things that are going to get you to revenue, right? And so is it, and you mentioned you're working on HR, you're working on finance, you're working on all these different elements to it. The infrastructure parts, like for example, like maybe in the HR function, I mean, you need someone to do X, Y, and Z job, and that's it. So it's what's the minimum I need to do to convince someone to onboard them and give them some day-to-day guidance. But there really isn't a little bit of a different story if you're venture funded, right? You can build out a small team, but what is absolutely necessary to get you to that minimum revenue level to keep you going the next couple of months?
I think it's intriguing that you started off by saying it's an obvious answer. It's only obvious because he's been incredibly successful, right? I think if you ask the question of 10 people in America, 9 that without your success would not see how obvious that is. And I've seen a lot of people, I'm impressed even by you're waiting so late to rebrand, because a lot of people will change the name 4 times in a year. It's not the name. You're not picking up the phone and calling people and forcing them to use the product. Yeah. So that's an impressive first step, is to pick up the phone and find a client. So awesome, good stuff. Who else?
Yeah. So of course, like 2011, 2013 goes on, and you're thinking about a revenue model for these, right? Because you're starting with reviews and it's somewhat unique, right? So how did you came up, or how many iterations you went through your revenue model that you were, okay, this one makes sense, and we're sticking to it? Or how many times you were like, okay, let's switch.
Yeah, and then those online, the question was about sticking to your revenue model and kind of finding what works.
Yeah, actually, it's a great question, because I like how didn't ask if we did. It's like how many times, right? And so there were, one of the things I maybe even more generally want to communicate, at least in my own particular experience, we made a lot of wrong, maybe you call them poor decisions, but none of them were ever fatal. And it was part of this learning process. So I was pretty convinced early on, with no data to support this, that we would do a lead generation model. So we would capture, we would get buyers to our site and then help them figure out what type of service provider, and then work with the service providers and get either a percent of the project.
To be in the
or
transaction.
project. And which is a very common model. And I spent some time just talking to service providers, and one of the service providers, and at some point I need to go back and tell this individual, he's like, no, here's the reasons why that's not going to work. And he rattled off, I think what were a couple of good reasons. And we'd already started to kind of test this a little bit. And go look at XYZ website, and this is what they're doing there, and I think that would work better. And he was right on. And so there were plenty of other things where we had more than one pivot, if you will. But as far as revenue model, yeah, we got it wrong the first time. But with some kind folks in market, got a great suggestion on where we finally ended up.
Thank you, Michael.
Sure.
Very impressive. You mentioned you bootstrapped. I would like to know if you go back, we still consider bootstrapping. I'd like to know how you think about it, and what's your advice to people who are starting now. Of course, if they are vertical and business model, give them the option to bootstrap.
And the question was, how did you choose to bootstrap? Would you do a bootstrap again versus take an investor down?
So I've actually been giving this topic a little bit of thought, but I think maybe even more broadly, you've got to find your own path. And obviously, for whatever concept, product, service that you're offering, there's going to be some needs for that. But then I also think you need to match that up with what your skills are and your experience. And so for me, and I still am, I'm more of a engineer product guy, and not one of these sales-oriented founder types. And so certainly back then, I really doubted whether I would be successful trying to raise money, both just because of my own personal skill set. And if you think about what we were trying to start, we were trying to, because most of our reviews are actually phone conversations so we have to schedule a phone conversation, conduct a phone conversation, record it, transcribe it, edit it for length and clarity, really expensive, right? So it's expensive user-generated content, and we're going to monetize it with advertising. Doesn't sound very smart. Really high-cost content and advertising doesn't sound very smart. And so I'm not sure if we had another route, but for me, bootstrapping, for me personally, I think it depends for everyone. Bootstrapping, well, there are reasons where you need to raise venture funding, particularly in large winner take all markets where other folks are raising funding, and you've got to move. You truly do have to move quickly. But as someone that's bootstrapped, not everything has to go quickly, and there's a time element, in particular with marketplaces. You've got to build the service provider side, you've got to build the buyer side, and spending twice as much money isn't necessarily going to get you to go twice as fast. It may get you to go 10% faster, right? At some point, there's diminishing returns. And at that point, we've had plenty of copycats, but no one truly trying to do exactly what we do. And so it was okay to bootstrap. It was okay to take a longer path. But it really depends on your priorities, right? One of my main priorities was independence, and so it took us a long time. It took us a long time to get to that first $1 million in revenue, but that's one thing I would. We've made tons of mistakes, but that's one thing. Bootstrapping is something I wouldn't change.
Question. Sure. Website, right?
That's correct. Yes.
How does that size of the website? How does it help?
Yeah. Good question. So we. Sorry for the question was about we have what we call a set of sister sites. One's called the Manifest, and so the question was sort of why did we do that? So this is even going back to when we rebranded in 2014, 2015. I think probably a lot of you experience this. You get this much traction on a new product or service. Right, the internet. There's people are taking your content, repositioning it. You're getting competition proliferates, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? That's good for consumers, for choice and stuff. But our thought was, again, we're SEO in particular back at that point in time was really critical to us. And so the thought was, well, even if our main site, our main brand is in the top search result, why not? If we've got all these folks that are doing something very similar to us, that are in spots, whatever 2 through 5 or 2 through 7. Well, why shouldn't that be us in the 7th spot? And it might sound arrogant. We're like, we can do it better. Most of them were. We've had a range of competitors with a range of perspectives on, content quality. I'll leave it at that. And so, our thought was we can produce something better. And so, yeah, so we've launched a couple of sister sites. The Manifest is the one that's actually done for us.
So is your evil plan to take over the world?
Something like that. Yeah.
Got it. I love it.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, it's funny that there's a couple of them that I asked them, and they were young.
What the hell were you thinking?
Well, yes, no, there's one of them that I last year or so. What did your parents think? Because he left one of the most prominent Fortune 500 companies headquartered in the DC Richmond area, and he left there we were still sourcing on it. That was the name of the company. You should see the pictures of the look of the website. It was I'm joking when I say maybe it was poor judgment on their behalf, but it was exciting, right? It was just a few of us. I worked directly with everyone. We were in we were in a co-work space that had a lot of the other attributes of lots of other small startups around interesting high energy environment, and I'm not quite sure how, because our first interviews we conducted in a restaurant. It was pretty unprofessional, right? And but they chose to join us, and I think all of our early hires, I think the vast majority are in the end pleased that they did that. but it really was challenging. I would also say too that it wasn't a job market like today. So we were there were still some economic challenges from the Great Recession. So could we, in today's job market, it might be a different story in attracting early employees, you know, on a bootstrap salary.
Oh, so-
Sure.
In the very early days, how much did you expect them to be ownership or to work in like empathy or to interact with this business?
Yeah, great question, and I think that's a balance through, you know, at any point in time. We were, you know, early on it was, I think it was pretty collaborative because I didn't know what I was doing either. I made a number of poor choices early on, and so
Poor choices in hiring or choices?
Poor choices in, for example, the market segments we went after.
Yep.
There was one point we even had a clear segment that was winning, that we were getting more, and in hindsight, it's obvious. That's an obvious segment to pick. And I still, even after we were getting results, suggested we continue to go after some other groups based on some past history. And then finally, it was just like, okay, come on. But I think it was pretty clever because none of us really knew what we were doing. I mean, at that point, I was early 40s. I had a lot of experience, a lot of work experience, general work experience, but none doing this. And so I think through maybe a dozen employees, it was one team, and we all collaborated. We got together probably on a weekly basis with each segment that each individual owned, and you know, brainstormed through what was going well and what wasn't, and set a plan for the following days.
And the DC location, being based in DC versus being based, let's say, in Silicon Valley, was that an issue or a bug or a feature?
Yes. So it was being in DC a bug or a feature. For what we were trying to build, I would say a feature. Right? We very early on, and even through our first dozen employees, it was liberal arts generalists, and I did most of I sort of taught myself to do a fair bit of the web work, and then we got some help in Eastern Europe. But DC is a pretty remarkable place for new college graduates, right? We've got, whether it's, you know, Philadelphia on down to Charlottesville, we've got a lot of really great universities, and the cost of living it's not great in DC, but it's certainly meaningfully better than New York or Silicon Valley.
I think we got time for maybe one or two more. Any last minute? First, please.
Sure.
You had talked about bootstrapping and then point where you raised the revenue to it. Did you at any point end up raising
Yes, actually, we did. So, yes. So, in it was probably 2014, a good friend of mine from actually all the way back to high school, who has a digital marketing business. We had been helping each other broadly, but him mostly helping me with my business, and so he became a seed investor, which gave us a little bit of breathing room. But at that point, we were around break even at that point, and then in late 2019 and then into early 2020, right before the pandemic hit, we decided to take a round of growth equity. And so for those of you that are familiar with growth equity, one of the big pitches is like, hey, we can help you scale, right? We see this through, we see all of these, whether it's marketing, whether it's scaling a tech team, we see this a lot of different places. We can help you with that. And we had a number of years before that, maybe it was 3 years before that, we had a number of firms call us to see if we're interested. And at that point, there were some competitive issues that were going on as well. It was finally like, okay, this makes sense. In particular, that we believed we were going to enter a more risky competitive environment, which what we anticipated happening didn't happen. But nonetheless, I think it was a good choice for us to give us some flexibility. Let's say we ended up selecting a partner that has truly been helpful in scaling. So.
Go ahead. No, you.
The partner that digital marketing got, was it money or like just down the road?
It was real money. Yeah. It was, but he, and I would say this also too for a number of our early employees, they've really been, well, technically, I guess we don't have co-founders, but this friend of mine who became an angel investor truly has been an emotional, and also helped with a lot of other practical issues. To some extent, he's been more helpful in stuff outside of money. And I said we've had a number of early employees that are remarkably committed to the company and essentially think like co-founders.
All right, last question. Take us home.
What are 3 tips that you would give?
3 tips to fellow entrepreneurs.
3 tips. So I think I may have shared one before. So one is there is no formula, right? You've got to figure out an approach that works for you and works in the business you're trying to build. I guess second, don't, and this is the bootstrapper me, I can't help it. Don't get overly enamored with fundraising. Right? I think in some circles that's a measure of success, raising money. Okay, you said 3, right? Not 2. I would, maybe this is a corollary to bootstrap, is look, you're going to make mistakes. And obviously try not to make any fatal ones, but just adjust and move on. And I think part of your approach needs to be, it's probably going to take longer than we think. One, because I'm going to make a in hindsight a poor choice, but probably a very rational choice at the time. It's not going to work out, and I'm going to need to adjust and to go in a different direction, and try and keep the risk of that low by having runway.
Well, Mike, I will wrap us up there and just say that these have been amazing nuggets of tips and tricks and stories that have been just incredible in your entire journey. And I congratulate you on your success and welcome you to the other side of not having a job. So, thanks for joining us, your family.